I'll read maybe 50 to 100 page ones.
Ties in a really strong environmental message, which I feel can be applied to today.
And I come from a family of teachers. We go 8 generations of teachers, so kind of didn't have a choice there.
We are the Front Page Pass, brought to you by Word Journeys, the literary world's hottest new podcast. Fellow publishing industry expert and author-illustrator-designer join together in bringing you the latest news, discussions, and literary-related entertainment for readers, writers, and educators alike.
Well, welcome to Front Page Pass, and thank you so very much for joining us today on this wonderful podcast. It's been a dream come true for me to be able to talk about all the years of writing and editing and all the different things I've done in the literary world with other people, like I do anyways when I'm teaching at writers' conferences. And we came up with this podcast, for a number of reasons, but the title, it's kind of a play on Backstage Pass, which of course is a coveted thing for people to have when they go to rock concerts and go backstage and see the band. Well, this is kind of the corollary of that. Front Page Pass would be talking as if the front page of a book. When we read the first page of a book, that's when we open ourselves to the world of whatever the book is describing. And so it's kind of a mystery whenever we start page 1. So we both thought it would be a really neat thing to do Front Page Pass. And welcome, Alexa, and I'm really glad we're doing this
Yes,
together.
absolutely. It's been a long journey, and it's glad to make the transition into the podcast world. So, and really be able to bring our audience and show them what we've done for so many years, and impart some wisdom along the way, keep you guys entertained, and we'll see what we can come up with. So yeah. And and of course we work together with Word Journeys Literary Services, and that's who's presenting this podcast. And we've been doing a lot of neat things lately. Yes, we have a lot of projects and a lot to unveil as well. We've honestly just one-stop show. I mean, we've edited nearly 200 published books. We've worked with a plethora of clients, and from ghostwriting, editing to graphic design, web design, etc. So we pretty much cover it all. And as I said, it's just great to be making the transition, so we can kind of impart that upon everybody else, and people that are in the literary world, I feel, will really benefit from this. So
yeah.
Yep.
And our own history is pretty interesting. We, we've known each other for quite a while. Well, for about half of your lifetime, half of mine. And it's really neat because we met about 13 years ago at the local library here, and I was teaching writers workshops, and this very, very shy but brilliant writer illustrator, 15-year-old girl, walks in, and the workshops were mostly for adults. I mean, we had people there from 11 to 95 in one particular workshop, and and you were working on a fantasy novel at the time, and so I remember working with you and mentoring you for a number of years, and then we kind of went our separate ways. Just you grew up, became a woman, and got into your career. But what I found really interesting is when we reconnected, lo and behold, the publishing industry bug just bit you, and you have this long career going on. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so as far as my background is concerned, honestly, I've loved writing since I was a child. I mean, before I could even actually write, if I did write, it was just a bunch of letters put together because I couldn't construct a full sentence. I would literally draw pictures and have my relatives, I'd tell them what the story was, they'd write it down to go with my illustrations. So it's kind of been with me since I was 3 or 4 years old, and it's completely stuck. And, here we are today. I have worked on at least 100 plus freelance projects from a graphic design aspect. I've been a part of 50 plus, I'd say roughly 50 plus authors, books, and I've just done a bit of everything from editorial to the graphic design, web design, PR marketing, and etc. So done a bit of everything.
All right.
So, and how about you, Bob? He has quite a bit more experience than I do, so you take it away.
Well, like you, I started when I was a kid. I mean, I was reading when I was 4, and I started writing when I was 7, writing stories and things. And I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I mean, I basically came out of the womb ready to go. And so when I was 16, I started my career. So that was 45 years ago. I started out as a sports writer at a local newspaper. And I was with them for 7 or 8 years, and then I was a magazine writer and editor For 8 years, I promoted the World Surfing Tour as well. And then I spent about 20 years as a magazine editor and writer. And then the past 20 years or so, I have really gone all in books. One thing, my ultimate dream was always to write a book or write a lot of books. And so I finally got to start really going after that dream about a little over 20 years ago. And so I've written 20 books at this point, and I'm almost done with number 21, which is called Open Mic Night at the Last Chance. And and besides that, the other thing I love to do is teach and mentor. And I come from a family of teachers. We go 8 generations of teachers, so kind of didn't have a choice there. And so I've been teaching at writers' conferences around the country, and I also edit books. And what I really, really love is taking someone's story, all the time they've invested in their lives, and helping them polish it to the point where readers go and get it and buy it. So it's just been an absolute love for me. And then 25 years ago this year, I started Word Journeys, and it initially started as a service for magazine writers, because that's what industry I was in at the time. But then I transitioned it over to books when I transitioned over to books. And now, we have clients all over the world, and again, it comes down to
a wide array of clients.
It comes down to getting to know these authors and knowing, and we work with a lot of first-time authors too, so it always reminds me of the excitement and the nervousness and the anxiety and the absolute love of process that I had in the early, and I still do every time I write a book.
And I feel like that's what we do at large, is help bring these stories to life through our creative and editorial abilities. And there's nothing quite like that. Just seeing an author, something they pour their heart and soul into, and being authors ourselves, we can relate. But just seeing the author when they, have come across the final product, they've honed their skill as, an author and grown. And for us to be the ones that have helped them through that process, help make their dreams come true, it's just really a joy, So, and as writers ourselves, who have been through that same process, it's great,
Right.
Truly encapsulates, by writers for writers, which is what Word Journeys is all about.
That's right.
And
that's exactly what we're bringing to Front Page Pass and to you. This podcast is for readers as well as authors, so we'll be talking a lot about books as well as authors. And to that point, we'll be interviewing best-selling authors. In fact, several have already signed up to be interviewed by us on this podcast.
We have a colorful cast of people that we're inviting in.
Best-selling children's authors, adults.
Bigfoot enthusiasts, that'll be an interesting one for everybody.
Right, that's right. Yeah. So it's going to be a really wonderful show, and we have a number of segments to the show that we're going to be presenting, which you'll see starting today. So
absolutely.
So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the publishing industry. Obviously, in the past year, we've had the pandemic, and thank goodness for our sake of us that we're writers, because writers have actually done pretty well during the pandemic. I mean, people had to go inside, they read more, blah blah blah. So the publishing world actually had a good year. The publishers that were able to handle the initial financial impact. So what's happening now in publishing is that publishers are buying up books left and right now. It's a great time to be a writer trying to sell a book right now. Great time.
And the only way that I feel like the industry is hurt somewhat, which you do have to point out, there's definitely more pros than cons, but it's just not being able to have live conferences where people can get out there and navigate a crowd and promote their work and whatnot. But everybody's staying at home. People want to read and kind of escape where we're at life right now, and the whether it's the political climate of the world or the pandemic. I mean, people want to open a book and want to escape from that. So I feel like the industry as a whole hasn't suffered, other than just in a few slight manners. But I feel like it's a wonderful opportunity for aspiring authors to either bloom, or writers that are experienced to really hone their craft and work on getting that book published.
Yeah, and there's there's some really good virtual conferences happening. In the past year. Kind of a slow growth in learning how to do stuff online with Zoom and so forth.
Yeah.
Programs, they accelerated quickly. So now there's some really good writing events. For instance, this weekend is the Tucson Festival of Books, which is the 5th largest festival in the United States. Well, they went online. So starting Friday for 2 weekends, there's going to be constant interviews with some of the top authors in the world. and a lot of other programs too. And then a couple other ones coming up that I want to tell everybody about is later this month is Bookfest LA, which is put on by Desiree Duffy of Black Chateau Enterprises. And Desiree and I worked together for a couple of years on a number of great books. And so she's a former DJ, so she has this background, and and she's transitioned over to this wonderful festival, which kind of goes along the lines of Tucson Festival of Books, and then later in the summer there's going to be the San Diego Writers Conference, and really writers conferences all over the country going virtual. Now I think what's going to happen, from what I'm seeing, is in the fall everything's going to start going live.
Exactly.
So we can't
and
wait.
I cannot wait.
We can't wait for Digital Book World.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up, Digital Book World. We went 2019 it was, and we had an absolute wonderful time and connected with some of the biggest publishers and names in the game, to be quite honest. So I'm really looking forward to that one. It's coming up in September, I believe. Yeah. So definitely ready for things to go live, and that would be the perfect event to launch it too. And we will be broadcasting live too.
We will. And so
just we'll take people on that adventure with us. So
just going live is so great for writers, because we're all such loners by nature, and we're stuck in our offices for weeks or months at a time writing, and sometimes our partners or loved ones, they support us, but sometimes they don't quite understand how we can just sit there for months at a time
and be a total recluse. I mean, you could go in a cave as long as you have the stuff to write with. You could go for it.
So writers' conferences are like family reunions.
Exactly.
And they're a blast. And
exactly.
Everybody suddenly can talk. You find out.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
We all do have social skills. No. But it's great. And I'm looking forward to it. So I know everybody else is. We're eager to get out there. So. Yeah. And do it in a safe manner as well.
And then we have some really big news from our own shop of a couple of books that are, they're well on the way to doing very well, and we'd like to share that with you real quickly. First of all, the book I wrote with Stevie Salas, who was Rod Stewart's lead guitarist in the late 80s, called When We Were the Boys. We wrote this memoir 5 or 6 years ago, and it was published in the United States then. Well, Stevie, in addition to being pretty well known in America, is a top shelf rock star in Japan. In fact, he and his partner Soji Inaba are the number one selling artist in Japan right now. So we were picked up last year by a Japanese publisher, and When We Were the Boys came out about a month ago in Japanese. And I don't know if you can see this, but it is in Japanese, and I can't read the subtitles either. But we went number one. And we were number one on the Japanese charts for 3 weeks. This most recent week, we dropped to number 3.
Still
but I got to tell you, it's a thrill to be associated with anything that's number one. And I think it's kind of ironic that 2 Americans are number one in Japan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting being number one for 3 weeks. I mean, that's the first for me. We were number one with Just Add Water, the Clay Marzo story, but that was only for a week. So this has been kind of fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I really think that Stevie Salas would be a phenomenal guest to have on, considering we're both musicians and everything. That would just be great. I feel like it would probably diverge from literary talk to music talk. So
it would.
We'll branch off and have a music podcast from this. Well, but yeah, I mean, he's just an incredible musician, and just the background itself. I would definitely recommend the book. It's
and the way we did this book is he wrote a lot of it on an iPhone and an iPad, and then I took it in.
I was going to ask about the method.
He wrote chapter overlays, and then I would expand the chapters. However, I learned something from him, and it took me a little while to figure out what it was. He would send me these stories in little 300, 400, 500 word bites. So, so 3 to 4 minutes if you're speaking. And I'm just going, God, how's he containing these stories like this? Because he's never written a book, and he's not. He doesn't really consider himself a writer, although now he's doing movie scripts and everything else.
Oh
now,
yeah,
so
he's
he certainly
into
is.
everything.
But what it happened is that Stevie's made 12 solo records, plus Inaba Salas, plus the work he did with Rod Stewart, and he's a really great songwriter. So what he did is he moved songwriting skills right over to book writing skills. So we were getting in and out of these really good stories in 3 to 4 minutes reading time, and it was just really cool to watch a musician just seamlessly do that.
And it's really neat. You think there's such a contrast between those two, but it's amazing how he was able to take that mindset and from him writing songs and everything else into literary format. Which made it easier for you. And I mean, he wrote that when he was on the road, basically?
Well, yeah, he was designing a new series of signature guitars in Germany, and he was he was working on the movie that became Rumble, which won a ton of awards from Sundance to Cannes to everything else.
Yes, absolutely.
And so he was on the road almost the whole time, and then he'd come into California, and we'd sit up till 3-4 in the morning putting everything together, and then off he went for 2 more weeks. You know,
and that's just kind of the thing you get when you have a variety of clientele come in, or just people you work with. It's just it's great, just all the characters that you really end up hanging out with. So.
But meantime, you've had something going on.
Yeah, so recently we have launched, or up for pre-order at least, Priestess of the Lost Colony by author Brandon Pilcher. And it's quite interesting. I designed the cover, and he is a brilliant illustrator. So he illustrated the characters and everything. I'm sure we'll end up putting a bigger version of that up on the screen for you guys to look at. And I highly recommend you would get it, of course. So basically, his book, it is set in ancient Greece 3,500 years ago. And it's all about, female empowerment, to be quite honest. It's about a headstrong Egyptian priestess, her brother, and their sacked colony. And it does consist of a rescue mission when the priestess lover falls prey to the tyrannical antagonist. She and her brother lead a mission to rescue her captured people, and they encounter many perils along the way and the wrath of a very angered god or goddess throughout the book. So it's a very intriguing read, and just a great twist, because a lot of medieval fantasy tends to happen in a more European setting, and this kind of branches away from that and really delves into magical realism. And I just feel that Brandon Pilcher did a very excellent job on the book. What would you say about it?
Well, this makes my heart skip, honestly.
Yes.
Because Brandon's a little bit different type of author that I've ever worked with. First of all, Brandon's autistic. He lives on the autism spectrum. And we spent about 2 years working together on this book. And he just has such a great gift of visioning things.
Absolutely.
Obviously, being such a good illustrator. And he always wanted to write a book, but when we first started, he really hadn't yet written more than 1 or 2 chapters of anything, because he was just doing short stories. But he did the work, and he did a great job.
He did, phenomenal.
And it's just a phenomenal thing for him to finish this book. So it's going to be published in early May by Open Books Press, and right now it's for pre-order on Amazon.
Yes.
Like you said, hopefully everybody gets it, because this is really an incredible effort by a young man who hasn't exactly had all the social advantages in the world to this point. But now, he's going to come out as a breakout
breakthrough author.
And we've got a great launch event set up in Southern California for him as soon as we get to go live. But yeah, I'm just so thrilled, and the cover that you and he put together, I just thought was brilliant. So,
thank you. Yeah, really I certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah. So now we'd like to talk about books that are out in our new series, Chart Toppers. Alexa?
Yeah. So one book that I like in particular is The Ridge Walkers by author Greg Walter. And he is a veteran, an author, a historian, and a Bigfoot enthusiast, which I did mention previously, as far as a guest we may have on here, which will be very exciting. But has vast knowledge on the subject. His book, he does an excellent job weaving in Indiana Jones-esque action and adventure and just intrigue into like kind of metaphysical events. Weaving that into kind of, I would say, a philosophy 101 class is what it feels like in some parts, but he does an excellent job. While those two things may seem like they have a contrast, Greg Walter, the author, he does an excellent job at weaving those two together. And also, amid all the action throughout the book, he ties in a really strong environmental message, which I feel can be applied to today, because a lot of things that he discussed in the book, just concerns about environmental issues, actually have happened now. So it's rather interesting. But it is chock full of adventure, and he, like I said, he just seamlessly weaves these two together. So I'm going to read a little segment of his book, one that I like, that I feel like kind of encapsulates everything that I just explained about it. But it is chapter 35, Skellins. The fog that had forced 2 hunters to pursue on foot receded down the ridgeline, but still drifted eerily through the forest, where I was trying to protect the young kid and small person from the third hunter. Both creatures were temporarily pinned down, preventing the hunter from walking over and shooting us. My sidearm was trained on him as I nestled behind 3 large rocks. However, I knew the shooters on the ridge would get a clear shot at me when the fog finished receding, which could happen at any time. I wanted to buy time so the 2 I cared about could get clear. At a rock outcrop on the contact zone, with a small sitting spot faced southwest, The fog receded, the rising moon's first light appearing as a beam on that spot. Suddenly, as if on cue, rose 2 giant 15-foot, bluish-gray skeletal monsters from the ground. They stepped through a sort of veil near the flat rock seat. Skeletons, stalking skeleton killers, roamed the forested ridgelines to search out any who opposed the Ridgewalkers and their allies. As the thin red line faded out on the horizon, the full moon rising, but mostly blocked out the ridge. An energy pulse emanated outward. The skeletons faded into the fog and trees, searching, heading up slope where Pat Smith was behind some rocks looking for a shot. I knew I was exposed and down to my last shot. I carefully retreated to where the small person and the kid were hiding. Kurt watched from his binoculars, instructing Pat through his headset as visibly aloud. Kelly was also looking for a clear shot, but fog and darkness hindered his ability. Floor followed quickly with me, but then broke off the check sacks while the fog set in, allowing for better movement. I snuggled Sig in my arms, holding him tightly as I ran and approached the shelter and nearby rocks. Suddenly, a volley of bullets whizzed by my head and struck by the rock behind us. One bullet grazed my belt, and rock fragments hit my head, barely missing Sig. Angry at missing, Pat sharpened his aim and lined a headshot at my head. Though through the mist, a figure rose up behind Pat. Kurt's view was a little blurred, but he saw an apparition rise up. "Pat, get out of there. Something bad is right behind you," he yelled into Pat's earpiece. "What? I do not see." Both skeletons were in full view, almost glowing with their ferocity. Pat turned and shot at the same. When the weapon was knocked out of his hand, he was lifted and thrown like a rag doll 20 feet, landing in a manzanita bush. One skeleton hopped over, retrieved him, and dragged him toward the place where they emerged. The other headed for the ridge for Kelly and Kurt. And basically, there are a lot of names mentioned, a lot of different characters mentioned, but Sig happens to be the baby Bigfoot, which a lot of billionaire-backed hunters are hunting, and the protagonist, Alex Boldway, is in the middle of rescuing. So I just felt like that passage was really neat and just kind of sums up Greg's style of writing and how well he does it painting a picture, and really illustrates what he's going for there. So.
Yeah, and with Ridgewalkers, you and he have had quite the run of podcasts.
We have
podcasts.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. He's been on at least 10 different ones so far. So he's doing well in the publicity game, that's for sure.
And can we expect to see him on ours, you think?
Oh yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I already talked to him about it, and Greg Welter, he said he would love to be on it. So as soon as he's done with these others, so but yeah, he definitely wants to join in and talk about his book. And even outside of just his book, he just has some vast knowledge that'll really leave you intrigued and kind of jaw-dropping stuff that he's accumulated over the years. So yep, I'm really looking forward to it. So. And what about you, Bob? Let's talk about it. Big contrast in genres here. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you couldn't get more of a contrast, right? Okay, yeah, Alexa, this is quite the contrast from the Ridgewalkers. This is a book called Blood Money by Chris Rydell. And Chris was the CEO of a very successful medical lab called Hunter Laboratories in California. He became a medical whistleblower, and the reason why is because the two large companies, LabCorp and Quest, were defrauding state and federal government funds and taxpayers. Therefore, through this pricing scheme, which is far too complex to describe in a minute here.
Yeah.
But anyways, so Chris has spent the last 14 years. He and his legal partners have spent the last 14 years really trying to root this out and filing suits. They're called Ketom suits against these two companies and others across the country wherever they're propagating this fraud. And to date, they've returned more than $500 million to taxpayers through the summaries or through the settlements, excuse me. And so this book came out in November, and it went to number 3 on Amazon in its category. And it's really shocking because we don't really think about, when we go get a lab test, and everybody has to get them sometimes, we really don't think about a $5 or $10 lab test being billed back to the Medi-Cal or Medicaid at $140 each. But that's what some of these companies do, and they defraud taxpayers to the tune of billions of dollars. So what I'd like to do is I'm just going to read a little bit of the prologue, and just to give you a taste of Chris. And Chris is a wonderful guy. In fact, if you want to get another taste of this book, his YouTube book trailer, which was produced by Emmy Award-winning documentarian Ken Kibo, is absolutely wonderful. It's right there on YouTube. So all you have to do is search Chris Rydell Blood Money, and it's a great 2-minute trailer.
Real quickly, tell whose quote is on the front of the book cover. It's pretty cool.
I mean, and the biggest case that Chris won was in 11 in California.
Yes.
It was a $240 million settlement against LabCorp. And the Attorney General for California at the time, who was overseeing that whole process, was Kamala Harris, who's now the Vice President of the United States. So, so she's been involved with this as well in the past. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of the prologue. Blood Money is the story of how a Silicon Valley CEO became a fraud fighter. It is an insider's look at the David versus Goliath struggle between a whistleblower seeking to save his company and stop taxpayers from being ripped off and healthcare companies engaged in massive fraud. Along the way, it exposes what it is like to work with government prosecutors. I lived the Silicon Valley dream, founding my first company at age 24, then starting 2 others while I was still a young man. The first 2 companies revolutionized how bacterial infections were diagnosed and treated, saving hundreds of thousands of lives around the world. My third company, Maris, jumped to another level entirely. From 1988 to 1990, it experienced the fastest growth among 2,000 labs in the industry and delivered the highest pre-tax profit margins. But in 1991, I achieved the ultimate Silicon Valley aspiration by leading the company through an initial public offering. A month after the secondary public offering, Business Week selected Maris as the 40th best small business in America out of over 20 million registered small businesses. We were deeply honored. We decided to celebrate our success in the best possible way. A few months after the SPO, I retired after 22 years in healthcare. I was 45 years old. Must be nice.
Yeah.
And for someone who grew up in a lower middle class family, you can only imagine how proud I felt. During the 1990s, however, 2 labs, dubbed the Blood Brothers by Wall Street, grew to dominate the industry: Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America, or LabCorp. When my wife Marcia and I came back into the industry 11 years after retired, the California laboratory industry had changed. Instead of walking into a level playing field for all labs, what we found was a rigged deck, a broad pattern of corruption, kickbacks, price gouging, and naked profiteering. This made it impossible for honest competitors like our 100 laboratories to survive. Even worse, I discovered that hundreds of millions of dollars were being stolen from California's Medicaid system. This corruption was anything but a victimless crime. Beyond California's taxpayers, many others were getting harmed, namely California's oldest, sickest, and poorest. What I found was that the laboratory testing market in California, dominated by the Blood Brothers, had devolved largely into profiteering by the greedy at the expense of the needy. I never imagined I would become a fraud fighter. My closest friends, also successful businessmen, despised anyone who sued corporations, particularly whistleblowers. This held throughout corporate America, which views whistleblowers as subhuman obstacles instead of principled people who stand for integrity and fair business and employment practices. Was I about to become someone they despised? And then it goes on from there. In Blood Money, Chris, he takes us through probably about 20 different cases out of all of those he's done. And it reads like a crime thriller. I mean,
absolutely.
White collar crime thriller. I mean, and this gets really dangerous to the point where he had to hire a Secret Service agent to advise he and his family on how to protect themselves, because some of these companies, you know, when you're suing a company for hundreds of millions of dollars, they're not going to play back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it can pose a,
but anyways,
serious danger.
Yeah, so Blood Money's done quite well since it came out. And it really is an eye-opening read for anybody who gets a lab test, which is everybody. So anyways.
And it's great to see him unveil that level of corruption and, see justice for it, for all the people that, lost their money. So it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things we do in our work, and that we like to bring to the show that I think is always fun to listen to when I listen to podcasts, is to offer some craft tips for working writers. And this doesn't necessarily mean just book authors. It means people that, journalists.
Oh, absolutely.
Columnists, educators, for sure, that they can pass on to their students. And since our podcast is called Front Page Pass, I thought we'd start off by talking about the front page of a book.
Exactly.
And a week ago, I was down in Tennessee with Melissa Jenkins, who's our lead editor on our team, and we were at Barnes & Noble, which was really nice because I hadn't been in a bookstore for a while because of the pandemic, and so we were going through the bookshelves, And I know a couple of people walked by just wondering what we were doing, because we were literally flipping through dozens of books, and all we were doing is looking at page one. And that's a tip that I learned a long time ago, but it's a great way when you're writing a book or you're starting the first page of anything. It's a great way to get your mindset on how you want to start it.
Exactly.
Like, for instance, when I do this exercise, which I do every time before I write a book, I go to the bookstore and I'll read maybe 50 to 100 page ones. And that's the only page I read. And what you can learn from page one is immense, because page one has to get the reader into the story. It needs to introduce a character or the situation. It needs to set a scene. And it also needs to set the tone or the voice of the story. All of that gets accomplished in page one. And I know when I'm editing people's books, we sometimes will spend, we'll sometimes rewrite page one 10 or 15, 20 times to get it right for that very reason. Because when you're presenting a book to try to have it acquired by a publisher, it has got to be right. I mean, they don't have time to hopefully get to the point where it gets right. You have to bring them in right off the bat.
Absolutely.
So one of the tips I always offer to writers is to go to the bookstore, get in the stacks, or go to the library, either way, and read about 50 page ones, and then look at how the author started the story, because when we start our stories, whatever we're writing, there's an infinite number of ways you could start the book. You literally have millions of possibilities, but you got to find the one that really connects.
Very true.
And this is a really neat way for us to be able to, to learn how to connect with that and to set the tone and so forth. So,
and to see what will pull the person reading it in. I mean, if they're picking it up off the shelf and just open it at first glance, they're gonna. Most people do typically read the first page. So it also helps train yourself as an author. What are you writing from your heart, I guess. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the first page is gonna grab the reader and pull them in and make them want to read it and buy it, and become a fan.
You make a really good point, because it is a major part of the buying decision. Because
absolutely.
When people go to the bookstore to buy a book, and no one thinks about this, but but this has been borne out by a lot of research, 50% of the buying decision is the book cover.
It is,
It's 50%. So for authors that don't spend the time, who are self-publishing or indie published, who don't spend the time to get a good cover design done, they are really not doing themselves a favor, because 50% of the buying decision is the cover, but another 10 to 15% is page one. And then
I'm almost willing to say more so, and then obviously the entire that carry out throughout the entire book, because there really is. I would willing to say that it's tantamount. The cover, you want to make sure that it completely encapsulates what's going to be in the book, what's going to be within its pages, and make somebody be eye catching enough that someone will pick it up off the shelf. And being somebody who has done graphic design, I can't tell you how many covers that I have designed. I feel like that is of equal importance. It's debatable, but I would say equal importance to what's when they do open it, what's on the front page. And if you have a killer combo, you pretty much have a new fan, or you're going to have someone buy your book and read it all the way through. So.
Yeah, and the cover and page one is you just nailed it. You said the right term for it. The cover plus page one is the killer combo.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. So. And if you're an author, if you feel like page one isn't right, if it's just not feeling right, keep rewriting it. You got to get that right. It's an absolute necessity. And I know at writers' conferences, when editors and agents, when we sit down with writers, there's a part of each conference where they get 15, 20 minutes to pitch us one-on-one on their story.
Exactly.
Whether they're looking for an agent or a publisher or an editor to polish up their book, they got to pitch that, and all, virtually all the time they send in 10 pages of their work for us to read ahead of time. And it's usually chapter one. And so chapter one, it just has to grab you. That's all there is.
And those two factors really complement one another. And so that's how it happens.
Yeah. So I'd strongly advise writers all the time. You can never do too much to page one.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And don't be lazy with the design as well. I mean, because like you said, it's kind of sad, honestly, and it may seem shallow, but it tends to be human nature where people will. And of course, I'm not talking about by word of mouth. If someone tells you go read this book, it's excellent. It doesn't matter what the cover's going to look like. You're going to read it. But it is really, really important. Like if you're walking, through a bookstore, and I feel most writers, all of us do that. I mean.
So hey, Alexa, we made it. We made it through the
We
first
did.
start. We pulled it off. I mean, It's so interesting when you think about something you want to do for in my case, for so many years, and then then it happens, and it kind of goes like a blur, but hopefully, it felt like a blur on this end, that's for sure.
Yeah, same here. But honestly, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I feel like this show will get better as time goes on, and we build our audience and everything. So.
Well, plus we are in future episodes starting very soon. We're gonna have some great guests.
Excellent guests. Yeah.
We're gonna have best-selling children's authors Sherry Kent and Derek Kent, and Sherry's been on Amazon #1 for like 10 different books. We're gonna have them. We will be having Stevie Salas on. You had mentioned that earlier. And we have a number of different authors. We've got top-selling Christian author Regina Merrick. She's coming on board in a couple of weeks. Plus, we've got two of the hottest new novelists that are up and rising in America, Tanya Brooking and Claire Eisenhower.
Exactly.
And I think we might want to bring them in together because they are great when they're together.
Yeah, great personalities. So they really play well off each other.
We'll bring them in. But we have a lot of guests, and as you mentioned, we're going to be broadcasting live from different writing events over the course of the years. And
that's what's fun about running through so many genres, is that you get so many different personalities too, as guests. So it's going to be a blast. It's going to be a blast. So stick with it.
As you said, Greg Walters agreed to come on the show.
Yes,
and I'm sure we can get Chris Rydell.
Chris Rydell, he'll be interesting.
He's an incredibly interesting man.
Absolutely.
But what we'd like to do right now is leave you with the New York Times top 5 bestseller list, both fiction and nonfiction, because as we mentioned before, front page pass is for readers as well as authors, and so these are the top 5 in fiction as of this week. Right now, #1 is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas, and then numbers 2 and 3, and this is unusual, but numbers 2 and 3 in the New York Times top 5 are by the same author. How is that for scoring? The Four Winds and Firefly Lane, both by Kristen Hanna. #4 on the list this week is Relentless by Mark Greaney. And #5 on the list is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn.
And New York Times top 5 bestsellers in nonfiction category is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, Just As I Am by Cicely Tyson, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee, Walk in My Combat Boots by James Patterson and Mark Eversman. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, so I apologize if I am. And cast by Isabel Wilkerson. So all very interesting reads there. Truly.
Yeah, and I saw Bill Gates on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, and that's a fascinating book because he's basically talking about how to avoid a climate disaster, and that's by rebuilding the economy, focusing on the things we need to for climate change to combat
it.
Just As I Am. I mean, Cicely Tyson just recently passed at the age of 97, and she's an iconic actress, dancer, singer. Just I would say probably 3/4 of the top African American entertainers and other entertainers in the country have been influenced in one form or another by her. And Walk in My Combat Boots. I'm really looking forward to reading that book because James Patterson's one of the most prolific novelists in the last 50 years, and that's what the book's about. It's a writer memoir.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
And hopefully, eventually, fingers crossed, one day we'll be reading my name on here, but we'll see about it.
Yeah, well, I'm ready to go back to #1, but in this country.
We're working for it. We're working on it, but no. They're all really intriguing reads. I would recommend checking them out. So anyways, we'll wrap it up with a lovely quote that you have come up with, Val.
Yeah. I love this quote. It's from Michael Mead's The Genius Myth. If every person has natural gifts and innate talents, then the true nature of education must involve the awakening, inviting, and blessing of the inner genius and unique life spirit of each person. And at the end of the day, isn't that what a great book is?
Oh, it is, yeah. That sums it up pretty much. So.
All right, well,
I've enjoyed it.
This has been fun.
It has been fun. We have many more coming, so stick with us.
Okay, and thank you all very much, and have a great day, and happy writing and reading. Thank you for joining us at Front Page Pass, where we present everything from new titles to rocking interviews with best-selling authors and publishing experts, writing and editing tips, the latest on the bookshelves for readers, and live coverage of writers' festivals, conferences, and author signings. Our mission: to serve up the world in a thrilling, wonderful, and most adventurous new way.